Good morning, everybody.
Good morning, everyone. We are excited to be a part of the UW-Madison Diversity Forum. This morning's section is titled Building a Wisconsin That Works for Everyone. And I am excited to share you have stellar leadership from the state of Wisconsin here to present to you the diversity work of the state. The three of us will share in this presentation. I am Dawn Krim, the Secretary for the Department of Safety and Professional Services. Joining me today is Joel Brennan. He is the Secretary of the Department of Administration, and Malika Ivanko, the Administrator for the Division of Personnel Services in the Department of Administration, will be a part of the presentation. We will first start with Joel. Joel Brennan.
Thank you, Dawn. I think we're going to advance the first slide here. I'm really pleased to be here with Dawn and Malika and to be able to join in this presentation today and to just talk about some of the ways that as an administration that we are trying to move equity, diversity, and inclusion move forward and truly have a Wisconsin government that works for everyone and a state of Wisconsin that works for everyone. And so, creating that framework of a Wisconsin that works for everyone has really been part of the governor's efforts since his first days in office, but even prior to that, throughout his career in state government. But as he was elected and as he took the oath of office, his first executive order that he issued on his first day and was shared with Dawn and I and our colleagues was about people in state government and about the ensuring of, that we could make Wisconsin work for everyone. We'll talk a little bit more about that executive order, but it started on day one, and it's been a priority from this governor from day one. The way that he was able to go around the state and do public town halls around his budget, even before the budget was introduced, to get input and information from every corner of the state is a way that he has tried to just not only show that that this is a value of his, but to do it and put it in practice. I'm going to outline just a couple of ways that diversity, equity, and inclusion have been a priority in this administration, both internally in what we do and externally with others across the state. One of the areas that I'm going to talk about has to do with what we have done around the recovery from the pandemic and the resources that we've been able to do towards recovery on that, the federal resources we've gotten first through the CARES funding and then through the America Rescue Plan Act, the ARPA dollars. If we've all had our lives changed over the last 18 months and from COVID-19, but if our efforts are only to get us back to where we were in March of 2020, then we will have failed miserably. And part of what the governor has talked about, part of what I think all of us as state residents have talked about, and we want to act upon is making sure that when as we're recovering from the COVID-19 pandemic, both the health aspects, but the economic aspects, that we're making the kind of investments that are going to truly change the dynamics for those underserved communities and neighborhoods and people around the state who have had a lack of opportunity, not just during COVID-19, although some of that's been magnified during COVID-19, but who have historically not had the same access to opportunity around the state. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also focusing on increasing agency leadership collaboration and communication opportunities, sharing resources and best practices. That's been something that's been part of the dynamic in the Evers administration. It certainly was from the start. We may have changed some of our tactics or the way we've been doing it during COVID-19, and we are all changed by COVID-19, but we'll continue to do that. We're committed to expanding and enhancing professional development, training opportunities, raising awareness, building knowledge and understanding, and encouraging and promoting that equitable and inclusive workforce. It's something that, again, has been a hallmark of this administration, a hallmark of this governor, and I'm going to share some examples of that. Starting with the first thing I want to talk about is how we're supporting an equitable pandemic recovery and ensuring that the recovery that we have and the resources that we have gained from the federal government to recover from COVID-19, that they truly are going into areas of need around the state. One of the things that's true about the economic challenges associated with COVID-19 is that they have not been meted out equally around the state. There are very specific industries that have been harmed more than others. People understand that Black business ownership dropped 41% nationally compared to 22% of the small businesses nationwide. So we have had challenges in Wisconsin, and those challenges have only been magnified and exacerbated, and historically underserved communities have been hit especially hard. The governor has made equitable recovery a cornerstone in these recovery dollars. With the ARPA dollars, the state of Wisconsin is receiving about almost $2.5 billion in support, and that is going to across various industries. It's going to very specific parts of the state, but I'm just going to highlight a handful here. Even outside of the ARPA dollars, we're making commitments to things like rental assistance. We have opportunities to do that in every county around the state, and making sure that people have access to a roof over their head and safety and security in a household. So we're making those types of investments. But the governor has, within the ARPA dollars, has really tried to make a commitment towards that equitable recovery. And some of these are grant programs that are ongoing right now. The first I'll mention is the Neighborhood Investment Grant Program. The applications for this program close on November 11th, a week from tomorrow. And what this program is doing is it will invest $200 million in capital projects all around the state in areas of need, in areas that have been affected by COVID-19. This is part of what we're trying to do to ensure that these unprecedented federal dollars have a tail on them, that we can make investments that are going to pay dividends for not only just those people who have been harmed over the last 18 months, but can set the table so that we can have the kind of recovery that's going to, when we are done with COVID-19 and we have some of that wind at our back, that we can have a recovery that lasts for the next 15 or 20 years. So making those smart investments in places and ensuring that we can have the kind of recovery that we need. I was very proud to stand with the governor in Milwaukee. It's the photo that's, I think, up here just a few weeks ago when he announced $75 million to support diverse business investment in communities that have been disproportionately affected by the pandemic. The funding is going to go directly to community organizations like chambers of commerce that work with minority-owned businesses, as well as CDFIs, community development financial institutions, that provide critical funding for small businesses that really have that traditionally have a hard time getting credit through conventional means. We're taking applications at this point for the $50 million Equitable Recovery Grant Program. Again, I think that the grants for that, or the application, is open until next Friday, November 12th. And these will be investing in community-based organizations that are addressing equity and eliminating disparity in communities. All of these are ways that we're trying to make sure that when we have these resources, we're able to deploy them in communities around the state, in neighborhoods that truly have been affected by COVID-19. The other one that I will mention, again, another existing program on the capital side, is it's $50 million for healthcare infrastructure. And this is to prepare us for the next public health challenges. It's to make sure that we can deal with some of those public health challenges that have only been amplified and magnified by the COVID-19 pandemic, and challenges that are in every community around the state, but certainly in those communities where the economic disparities have existed over time and have continued to only be magnified. And, really, these are part of this unprecedented opportunity around federal dollars. But I go back to one of the points that I started with, that if our intent is only to get us back to where we were in March of 2020, where there were lots of families, lots of neighborhoods, lots of communities in Wisconsin that were not gaining the full access to opportunity and didn't have that opportunity that lots of us are blessed to have in the state. If that's our objective, then we will have failed. So the Evers administration objective is to make sure that those communities that have seen disinvestment, that we're doing things to ensure that we can have a longer term recovery, and that people can truly change lives over the course of the next several years. The next thing I want to just talk about a little bit is around our Supplier Diversity program. It is run by my colleague Tandra Davis here at the Department of Administration, and it's an area I think that we're proud, even during these challenging times, we've been able to breathe new life into and to really focus on ensuring that there's opportunity. In procurement, in real estate, the state of Wisconsin spends significant money, hundreds of millions of dollars on an annual basis. And we need to ensure, and I think that Governor Evers and our administration feel a responsibility to ensure that those dollars are out into communities around the state, and that small businesses, that businesses run by people of color, that women-owned businesses, that all of those have opportunity and access to those same resources. And so over the course of the last few years, under Tandra's leadership and under the governor's direction, we have worked on making sure that we're looking at our customers, both our internal and external customers, making it as easy as possible for businesses to get certified in that program, because if you have certification, there is a bid preference that's available. We have a record number of over 1,300 certifications in the last fiscal year. And all of those are steps and progress that this administration has made, and we will continue to focus on. In the last fiscal year, we exceeded the 5% goal. It was about 5.35% of the spending, and I think we're proud of that. But it's also, that's the first time in the last 6 or 7 years that's happened. It's only the 5th time in the 38-year history of the program. So clearly, here in Wisconsin, we have some momentum, but we have a long way to go. One of the things that's up on the screen is around the governor's conference on business development that's happening in early December, and we'll be moving forward with. So the last thing I'm just going to hit on is around how we're fostering equity in our own state workforce. If you're going to push forward on these initiatives externally, you have to do it internally and inside state government as well. So we have made a priority in our hiring. We've made a priority in our training opportunities for our workforce. We also, earlier this year, the governor introduced what we call the Vision 2030, which potentially would look at maybe shrinking some of the state's footprint, but also expanding and looking at the opportunities associated with working virtually and some of the necessities that we've had around COVID-19, but the opportunities that provides for anyone in the state to become a new state employee. And I think the governor says this, I think we all believe this on this panel, and people who work in our administration believe that the richness that we have as a state and the richness that the opportunity we have at state government is to ensure that we have as many people as possible from every corner of the state, from every economic background, from every ethnic background, to be able to contribute to making the state a really great place to work. We have demographic challenges moving forward in Wisconsin and elsewhere, and we will continue to work on those moving forward. One of the ways that the governor put wind behind that was through Executive Order 59, and my colleague Malika Ivanko is going to talk about that as she starts her comments. So I'll turn it over to Malika.
Thank you, Joel. So my name is Malika Ivanko, and I'm going to talk about some of the nuts and bolts of how we got here. In my role, I oversee all of HR services for our state. I have to say I have a dynamic team of individual HR professionals and directors, deputies. We span across all state agencies. We are responsible for our training and development, classification and compensation, our benefits and payroll administration, our equity and inclusion area, as well as our workforce and labor relations. So in total, there's close to 400 HR members across our state serving our dynamic agencies. So just a little bit of background. When we first started this work, it was really important to the Gov's office that we be very intentional about how we move forward. We started out, we had a strategic planning discussion with our agency leaders, and I have to say that this group and our agency leaders are our secretaries, our deputy secretaries, our assistant deputy secretaries. And this group has been some of the most engaged leaders that I've ever seen across the state. They took when I say they understood the assignment, they took their role very seriously in coming to the table. So what we did, we had a conversation around some of our major areas regarding our workforce. We asked them to identify what some of those gaps were, opportunities for improvement and how we can better support them. It was also important to our governor's office that we also have a separate and more important conversation around equity and inclusion. And I have to say that we had about 98% of our agency leaders that participated in this process. So I was astounded. Again, they took it very seriously. They gave us a lot of great feedback, priority areas that we could really address as it relates to equity and inclusion, looking at some of the challenges that they were dealing with and that they wanted us to support them better in. What we did is we took that information and then we had a strategic planning retreat with our entire HR leadership team. We provided the HR leaders with that information. We also then, as a team, we reviewed and prioritized all of the things that had been going on at that time. I believe the number was over 100 initiatives that we were working on. So we were also able to internally identify what our core values were. We looked at the information and reviewed that information, prioritized what we received from the agencies, and then we were able to develop our goals and our strategies to really help move us forward. So what you see on the screen right now are those strategies as it specifically relates to equity and inclusion. So the first one is really focused on reviewing our EI-related programs, our policies, looking at the barriers, our trends and opportunities for all of our EEO, AA, equity and inclusion-related programs. I don't have all the time in the world to go over that with you, although I would love to share everything that we're doing in HR, but I'm just going to provide one example. As a result of just an example of one of the things that we were able to do in looking at our programs, we revamped, expanded, worked on our outreach for our student internship program. We moved our timeline, we worked on our recruitment, we worked on our outreach, and as a result, we were able to more than double the pool of applicants that we saw. Just a few numbers. In 2019, we had 376 applicants. In 2021, we had almost 800 applicants. In 2019, getting more specific, we had 103 applications from students of color. By 2021, after we revamped the program, we had 231 applications from students of color. Very proud that we were able to do that, but that really came from us digging in, looking at how we could change and revamp and really serve our program in a better way, and working with our leaders. The second one is really working on establishing our metrics and providing regular data reports to our agencies. As we have moved forward, and what we've heard and gotten a sense of from our agency leaders was just the importance of really being able to use data in driving the decisions, not just because it's a great idea or because we think that this is what's wrong, but really using data to inform our decision making. So one of the things that we started doing, in addition to the data that already existed around EI, we expanded some of the areas that we focused on as it relates to our data. For instance, we started tracking our exit interviews. Initially, a lot of our agencies were doing different questions and we really didn't have benchmarking opportunities. So we got all of our agencies using the same questions so that we could really track our turnover, our exit interview data, looking at our demographic data. We expanded the areas that we were looking at. And then we also started providing regular data reports and dashboards to our agencies so that they could access as needed. The third is expanding and enhancing our professional development and training opportunities. We started out by conducting a training needs assessment with our agencies to really try to identify what those gaps and opportunities were. We also instituted a enterprise learning management system, Cornerstone, which all of our agencies are on, so that we can be consistent in the training offerings that we are providing. We also began working on a curriculum for our equity and inclusion training for our employees. And we also launched a train the trainer session for our agency subject matter experts. One of the things that we did related to training and professional development is we started getting a lot of questions when we started talking about equity and inclusion is what definitions are we using? How are we, when we say diversity and equity and inclusion, what exactly are we talking about? And we noticed that, of course, depending on who you ask, people had different definitions. So what we wanted to do is we actually pulled our agency leaders to the table, our Gov's office staff participated. We gave them homework. We had a couple of different sessions where we actually walked through the development of those DEI definitions. And so we were able to then take those definitions that we developed and use them to guide the development of our agency EI plans that I will discuss a little bit later. So we worked on that. That's also used in our EI trainings. We also then started assessing some of our training offerings to see how we needed to integrate and ensure that we were integrating equity and inclusion into those trainings. We also wanted to make sure that the people who were on the front lines of doing this work, our equity and inclusion professionals, that they had the necessary training and support that they needed. So we also had regular meetings and numerous trainings with this group of people. Number 4 was really focused on increasing our collaboration and communication activities. This was really designed, again, as we talked about, with our agency leaders, making sure that we can move forward together. So we wanted to provide those opportunities across the board for our agency, the collaboration, the sharing of best practices, us being able to really benchmark what those best practices are. So we have continued to engage our agency leaders in our strategic planning efforts and sharing of best practices. We have met, when we were doing our EI plan development, we met to talk to them. We have met to talk about recruitment and retention efforts, the use of technology, how as a state, we're streamlining our operations to use technologies and some of the things that we can do better. And then 5 really focuses on building those relationships with our external organizations, institutions, benchmarking private and public sector best practices. So through the relationships that we've been able to develop, so the example that I provided earlier in really being able to increase through our student internship program, the number of applicants that we had, we were able to do that because of the relationships that we have built across the state, right? And that's getting outside of Madison, focusing on some of those other areas that we don't normally utilize. So making it much bigger and making it statewide. Second, I want to just talk about the executive orders that have been in place. So we have Executive Order 1 and Executive Order 2. Executive Order 1 really relates to our state's discrimination policies. This executive order and both of the executive orders have been just instrumental in bringing visibility to the policies and programs that we're already working on, as well as really helping us to establish a firm foundation and helping us to move forward with the EI goals that we had established, as a state. As a result, we have developed a workforce, respectful workplace, harassment and discrimination policy training, which all our employees are required to take on an annual basis. We developed a workplace policy and complaint procedure, which is our handbook chapter that outlines our complaint procedure as well as roles and responsibilities and the investigation process. We revamped our EEO complaint process, as well as we developed an investigation process training for our supervisors as well as our EI professionals. And then also we developed a mediation program and trained close to 20 mediators to assist during this process. We also redesigned our reasonable accommodations application and assessment process through Executive Order 1. Executive Order 59 provided us really with a solid footing that helped us prioritize and move forward with the EI initiatives that have been significant and very important to the administration. So number one, it really focuses on our State Affirmative Action Council, which has been in existence for over 20 years. But what the executive order did was really expand the focus of our State Council on Affirmative Action. Before, it was focused on compliance with affirmative action in the workplace. Then the executive order served to expand the focus on recruitment and retention efforts, championing diversity and inclusion efforts, as well as they have been a great assistance in helping to disseminate some of our state employment opportunities. Number two is our focus on our agency equity and inclusion plans. Our responsibility as DPM was to establish the standards, the guidance, and the support to ensure that there was consistency in the development of our agency EI plans. So what this did was combine, right now our agencies are required to develop their affirmative action 3-year plans. Through the executive order, the requirement was that all agencies develop an equity and inclusion plan. So what we did so that our agencies did not have to develop 2 plans was we put the requirements of the affirmative action plan as well as the equity and inclusion plan together. Focus on the implementation, how we would train our employees, as well as having a plan for communicating the plan, and then also having a plan for evaluation, monitoring, and then the ongoing reporting. We have spent a significant amount of time training our agency staff, providing info to our agency leaders, training our EI professionals on the different components of the plan. As a result, and I'm very proud to say, we have approved all of our agency's equity and inclusion plans. They went into effect January of this year, which Secretary Krim will provide a little bit more information as an example of her agency's equity and inclusion plan. We have also been required to provide those updates to the governor's office. So they have actually asked us to review. They have reviewed all of our agency equity and inclusion plans. They had questions for us, and we are also required to provide regular updates on those EI plans to the gov's office. We will then start our monitoring efforts, which we have discussed with our agencies. We will start those. So we have an entire process that we've developed, and we will start those monitoring process efforts January of this coming year. The third is providing mandatory professional development, equity and inclusion training for our employees and agency leaders. So we worked, I think earlier I alluded to the fact that we were starting to work on a curriculum for our EI training. So we worked with our training team as well as our EI subject matter experts to develop the curriculum for the training. We rolled out the training, and what we wanted to be really intentional about was, affirmative action has really been about compliance. And so we wanted to go much further beyond just the compliance. And so we actually titled the training, Moving Beyond Compliance and Fostering a Diverse, Equitable, and Inclusive Work Environment. We rolled that out last fall. Part of our objectives with the training was to make sure that there was an understanding in the differences between diversity, equity, and inclusion. As I stated earlier, you'd be surprised just how many that just really don't understand and have a good grasp on those definitions and the differences between them. Really being able to identify those attributes in characterizing a diverse work environment. And then I also being able to identify what some of those major individual barriers that employees often face, as well, personal and in the workplace barriers, and how we could help address those barriers. So that was really the focus of that training. We had last count about 80% compliance of employees who had completed the training. We also, out of that, when I have to say that we got several emails, complimentary emails from that training, that employees were very appreciative. We got compliments from both our employees and our leaders. And as a result, we also received additional requests for training, other equity and inclusion trainings. As an example, earlier this year, when we were dealing with some of the community, the unrest that was happening in the community, that we actually had a request from leaders just to talk about how is it that we can start having these conversations with our leaders, with our employees. So we had then offered trainings. So we worked on that for our employees, and then specific to our agency leaders, what we did was we asked our agency leaders, again, these are our secretaries and deputy secretaries, work with them to ask them to identify what their top 3 to 5 areas were as it relates to equity and inclusion, where they wanted to receive training. We provided a list and asked them to select those 3 to 5 areas. And from that, we were then able to prioritize and we offered a 5-month-long series just for our agency executive leaders. We used a third-party vendor for that. It was very well received. We had 95% participation at most of the trainings during the 5 months. They were very engaged. They did their homework. And again, we have continued to discuss with them additional strategic conversations with the group throughout the year. I won't touch on the supplier diversity because Joel already provided us an update on that. And then I'll end just by talking about the Governor's Advisory Council on Equity and Inclusion. As I said, the difference with our State Council on Affirmative Action was really focused on compliance. It expanded that focus. But it was really important when we were meeting with the Gov's office that he wanted to pull together a group, an advisory group that really could advise both him, the Lieutenant Governor, as well as our Secretary Joel of Administration around different components of equity and inclusion, that it be a well-represented group across all industries, really focused on ways we can improve equity and inclusion across our state. So not just the workforce, but also expanded across our state. We spent a significant amount of time with the Governor's office discussing the membership, the focus, and the charge before it was officially announced in January earlier of this year. And then with those discussions came the appointment of our very own Secretary Cream to lead that group. So I will turn it over to Secretary Cream to talk more about her agency's equity and inclusion plan, as well as the Governor's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Council. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Malika. What you all have heard so far is us building on the work of Dr. Russell Young, who was the keynote from yesterday. He talked a great deal about government passing equity bills. What you heard Secretary Brennan talk about was this governor putting into motion policy and legislation to look at a more equitable workforce for the state of Wisconsin. What Secretary Brennan outlined was use of dollars from the state budget, from the governor's budget, and from the American Recovery Act to support more equitable work within the state of Wisconsin. What Dr. Young also talked about yesterday was flocking. And so what you heard this morning was Malika Ivanko talk about how her Division of Personnel Services worked to flock state agency leaders together and the state agency's workforce around diversity, equity, and inclusion tactics, around building an infrastructure of guidance and support for what agencies would need to operationalize Governor Tony Evers' vision of a more equitable workforce for the state of Wisconsin. In her flocking example, she talked about what we could do within state government, but she also talked about the voices around the state leaders that are doing the diversity, equity, and inclusion work that can support and amplify the work that Governor Evers wants to do around diversity, equity, and inclusion. People were informed through trainings. People created plans throughout their state agencies so the state workforce would all be working toward that same goal, building a more equitable workforce. And all that ties into the theme of this year's UW-Madison's Diversity Forum and many of the sentiments shared by the keynote speaker yesterday, Russell John. So what I'm excited to do this morning is build on the information and the stage that Joel Brennan shared through the efforts and desires and commitment of diversity, equity, and inclusion that Governor Tony Evers talked about, and then also give some examples of some of the framework that Malika Ivanko and her Division of Personnel Services team set out with our agency leaders and our state agencies. And so first and foremost, I want to talk a little more specifically about the equity and inclusion strategic plans that were put into play at state agencies. And so what you see on the slide is some details about our plan, but I also want to show you an example of our booklet, which is our plan in action. And so when you look at the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Strategic Plan for the Department of Safety and Professional Services, we wanted to focus on three main tenets: recruitment, retention, and agency culture. So when you think about recruitment, we wanted to make sure that our agency reflects the makeup of the state of Wisconsin. And we wanted to make sure there were opportunities for diverse leaders to lead. And so with that, with our 13 appointed staff members, I'm pleased to share that our leadership team is actually minority, majority led. More leaders of color leading in leadership positions at this agency. And with that, we wanted to demonstrate visibly and on the ground what diverse leadership looks like and what it could do. And I believe that helps us incrementally increase the recruitment of more women, more minorities, people of color, disabilities, veterans. We want everybody working at the Department of Safety and Professional Services. And so we've modeled that in our leadership. When I think about retention, it's not enough to open the door and have people walk through the door and be a diverse leader. You got to build on that. You're not one and done. And so what we're trying to do at our agency is retain a workforce that could actually support the work and needs of the agency while supplying and meeting the demand of our statewide citizens. And so in recruiting a diverse workforce, we believe we'll be meeting that need. And we'll be working alongside everyone so everybody sees the importance of all the voices at the table doing this good work. But when you bring people to the table, you got to support them. And the support that we're doing is through pay and progression. What we've noticed is there were many positions at our agency that just had one stage. There was no room for growth. So we wanted to look at how we can support growth, get people into a position. What is the pathway forward? What does the future look like? That's what pay and progression was about. When you hire people, you want to make sure they're armed with the resources to do the best work possible That's where our professional development has come in at all levels for our workforce. And then shared leadership. My leadership style is about collaboration, all of our divisions working together for the greater good of improving the work of the agency, but more importantly, responding to the citizens of Wisconsin. And a shared leadership collaborative approach helps us to do that. But when you do this work, it's important that you're doing the work in a culture that actually that fosters an inclusive workplace and encourages people to work together and embrace diversity as a core value and make it as part of the essential work that we do in the workplace. You have to talk the talk and walk the walk. And that's what we've been trying to do at the Department of Safety and Professional Services. But in addition, we are looking at integrating our equity and inclusion work across the agency, not just in the people, but in the product. So when you think about our work, it goes beyond who we hire and who we must consider in our work. It also speaks to the industries that we regulate and the citizens that we work with. So for example, we license over 1 million licenses every 2 years at our agency. When you're doing that licensing work, there's a lot of exams, continuing ed, and things that take place. We are the bulk of the backbone of the plan of review and instruction of an inspection of the construction industry. So when we have people that we're working with, we want to make sure that workforce is diverse as well. So when you think about trade exams, we are now offering those trade exams in English and in Spanish because we want to make sure the door's open for people to walk through to be in the career of their choice. We are looking at educational institution equity. We actually have the Education Approval Board, Education Approval Program now at our agency, and we certify different for-profits and nonprofit institutions around the state. We want to ensure that they too have an eye on equity and diversity as they're supporting their students. And then if things change and students need to transfer, we help those students with that transferability around the state to other programs. When you think about the regulatory boards that actually govern the work that's happening in our professions, we have over 100 boards, committees, and councils that we work with. And I have actually stopped in and spoke at all 100 to thank those citizens for volunteering for being on the boards because they set up the framework of what's necessary to be in those professions. So I talked to them about those boards reflecting the diversity of the state, and also bringing those voices that maybe haven't been heard into the boardroom to help set policy, to help set guidelines for those professions. But we want to ensure also that the entry standards are inclusive and not exclusive. So when I meet with the board members and I say thank you, I also say look around the room whose voice is not present. Let's ensure that they're present. When you think about building codes, I talked a bit about the construction industry. We know that sustainable building codes are more equitable. People are living in conditions that are healthier for them. So when we think about our updates in the building codes, what innovations haven't been included? Who isn't at the table? Those are the questions that we're asking. And so we have infused equity, diversity, and inclusion in all the work that we do, supporting the industries that do the work that we do. Over 244 licenses. And so we're often looking for opportunities to talk with people in the field, industry leaders, also about the equitable work that Governor Evers is trying to move forward. How can we do it in our agencies? How can you do it in your workforce? That is part of the message. And so Malika also talked a bit about the Governor's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Council. I am so proud to chair that council. It was born out of Executive Order 59, which created the Advisory Council. And that council was created because Governor Evers wanted all of the good ideas from our agencies to bubble up, but also in partnership with the good ideas of those who are doing the work around the state, already diversity, equity, inclusion leaders. How can they help inform the work of state government? As the largest employer of the state, it's important that we listen to our employees, but we also listen to our citizens to do the best work we can to create a Wisconsin that works for all. So when you think about that advisory council, what it does is it provides strategic guidance to the governor, the Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, as well as our DOA Secretary Joel Brennan, who you've heard from today. That council strives to provide guidance in developing a sustainable framework to promote and advance diversity, equity, and inclusion practices across state government. Again, thinking about what Dr. Russell Jung said yesterday, equitable policies, that's the key. And that's what this council is trying to do. And so when you think about this council, we have brought on 31 members, and everyone is excited to participate and bring their expertise to bear to do this work to help the state's workforce be the workforce that supports all. So the council members have been all appointed for 2 years. And as Malika shared, the first, it began back in January. And back in January, they were charged. And you see on the screen, there are 6 bullet points. And it was a tall order, but everybody was up for the task. Identifying, promoting best practices, reviewing and analyzing statutes, regulations, and policy, analyzing and evaluating the relevant information and the data that we have regarding diversity, equity, and inclusion so that we can establish specific goals. Remember, as Malika shared, there are goals set up at every agency. This council is looking at the big picture of goals, looking at policies across state government. How can we ensure the equitability in those policies? Looking at our supplier program. Are we asking the right questions? Are we meeting the 5%? What more can we be doing? What additional strategies can they recommend that maybe they've seen in their work throughout the state? How can we put all that good thinking in the room from state government and leading industries around the state to do this best work? How do we identify and recommend ways to engage and bring visibility to the work that's happening around the state? As you know, our state is a diverse state in terms of who is here. Right now is November, Native November, looking at our indigenous populations. Last month, Latino, Hispanic month. We are looking at what's happening. Back in June, the Juneteenth flag was raised. This is a state that recognizes who is here, but how do we help bring more visibility and acknowledge the contributions of those communities? Think about our Hmong culture and our Hmong communities and populations around the state doing incredible work. We need to be able to recognize that. And this council is about bringing to bear, shining a bright light, raising the visibility, acknowledging the contributions of all of its members in the state of Wisconsin. And then lastly, we want to provide membership recommendations to the boards and commissions that the state of Wisconsin has. I talked a bit about the over 100 committees, boards, and councils that are just at my agency, the Department of Safety and Professional Services. We just scratched the surface because those are just about those professions we govern. The boards and commissions that the state of Wisconsin has touches all areas around the state. So the membership recommendations are they too should be diverse. And this council is going to help us do just that. So again, a tall order for the 31 people that have been appointed to the Governor's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Council. I realize that print is very small, but I wanted to be sure to make sure you see who is present, whose voice is at the table. So when you see them and you have ideas, you let them know so they can bring them to the council. And we can tell the governor and lieutenant governor and Secretary Joel Brennan directly what we're hearing, what we're seeing, and what voices are not present. And so it really is important that you understand that I really rely on this council to really tell me what they're seeing so we can tell the governor what the reality is around the state of Wisconsin so that we can do this work in a way that adds to the flocking that is already happening within the agencies. We can flock all 72 counties around the state to ensure that diversity, equity, and inclusion is at the center of what we're doing. And Malika talked about me serving as the chair of that council. I do not do this leadership work alone. I am pleased to share that Mai Zong out of Eau Claire, Wisconsin, serves as the vice chair. And what she is doing is working closely directly with our subcommittee chairs to ensure that the work that they send forward is aligned and actually covers the state's 6 council charge priorities in a coordinated way. The subcommittees, there are 3, and they are chaired by Secretary Mary Kolar of Veterans Affairs. She leads the Community Engagement Subcommittee, and they are focused on creating and sustaining an environment that regularly stands for, recognizes, and celebrates diversity, equity, and inclusive practices and initiatives, community and state culture events, and other significant activities and efforts. Again, illumination, visibility, shining a bright light, amplifying the work of the communities around the state. And then our next subcommittee is chaired by Robin Davis. She is the president and CEO of the United Way of Brown County in the Green Bay area. And Robin Davis's subcommittee is the Data and Policy Subcommittee. They are tasked with reviewing data, policies, statutes, and regulations to eliminate barriers, gaps, and inequities, focused specifically in the areas of homeownership, business development, and employment. And then our third subcommittee, the Economic and Business Development Subcommittee, is actually chaired by your very own Dr. LeVar Charleston, your diversity leader. He is also a very valuable member of this council and has jumped in day one, wanting to do the heavy lifting when we think about economics and business development. And his subcommittee has decided to identify and implement systemic strategies that will increase the utilization of marginalized groups and women-owned businesses through state contracting and other support mechanisms. And so this is the leadership of the Governor's Equity and Inclusion Advisory Council. And what we've been doing since January is we have quarterly meetings as a full council, but in between those full council meetings, each subcommittee is meeting monthly to actually put together an action plan that will get at the very goals and tasks of the work of each of their subcommittees. And so we are just finishing up almost a full year. We're at 9 months of the council having met. We spent the first 6 months building the capacity of our 31 council members so they had a better sense of how state government works. What are some of the programs that are already in place so that they can begin to think about some of the action plan details of each subcommittee's work. Our goal is by February 2022 to actually have an action plan around the 3 subcommittee areas that are coordinated with a strand across all 3 of them with the support of Mai Zong to ensure that we are collectively doing this work together so that we can move the state of Wisconsin forward. Year 2, beginning in February 2022, will be part of implementation of the action plans in place. And so what we realize is that foundation of the plan is so important. People need to be armed with the information to do their best work, to put it into the plan, and then we will move into implementation in 2022. And then a year later, we will evaluate the implementation plans and have some best practices. We'll be utilizing the matrix that Malika talked about that will be similar to the plans at every state agency. We'll be monitoring the progress of the subcommittees, and we will be reporting back to Governor Tony Evers, Lieutenant Governor Mandela Barnes, and Secretary Joel Brennan on the action plans, the implementation, and the progress. And so what you have heard from the three of us today, from Malika Ivanko, Secretary Joel Brennan, and myself, is how Governor Tony Evers is trying to put together a Wisconsin that works for all. And when you say works for all, it has to be grounded in equity, diversity, and inclusion, because we want all voices at the table, and we want all citizens to know they have a voice and they can participate. So bring their ideas so that we make Wisconsin the best place that we can make it. And so with that, we are excited to answer any questions that you all may have from this session. Thank you for this opportunity.
Wonderful. Thank you all for these presentations. We have some great questions that have come through in the chat. A first for our speakers, there are many people who really appreciated this session, so thanks to everyone for that. So a couple of the comments and questions were related to the definitions themselves that Ms. Ivanko, I'm sorry about that, described. So is there somebody, the one comment is, I'd love to see the definitions. I think they'd be really useful when engaging in EDI-related conversations. I literally just had somebody ask me 30 minutes ago, what do those words even mean? So is there a way to share those definitions, a place that folks can go to find them?
Yes. If you email me, I can send them to you and you can share them if you want. I believe that if you go to our DPM webpage, our Division of Personnel Management webpage with the state of Wisconsin government under the Department of Administration, you will see our equity and inclusion plan there, and the definitions is also there. But a shortcut is that I can email them to you.
Excellent. Okay, we'll try to get that link into the chat before the session ends. And then another one, Ms. Ivanko, I love the strategies. Can you share any reflection related to anything you discovered about job postings and how the language in the job postings may deter applicants from diverse backgrounds to apply? In reviewing the data, did this come up, and what strategies have you put in place to address this?
I'm sorry. I'm going to ask you to repeat that. I'm trying to look at
it's a long, I'll summarize.
Okay. Yes.
I think the question is trying to say, when you were looking at the data about the job postings, did you get any sense of how language in the job postings may deter diverse applicants from applying, and did this come up, and what strategies have you put in place to address this?
Yes, so we are continuing to look at our job postings because, of course, as they come up, as we're working with managers, and I have to just give a shout out to, because when Dawn is saying that it absolutely takes a team, it does. My director for equity and inclusion, Larice Lincoln McGinnis, and her team have been so instrumental in just really moving some of these initiatives forward. And so one of the things that we have worked on internally, she has worked with our merit and recruitment and selection team that's responsible for a lot of those jobs announcements, and being able to look at those jobs announcements through an equity and inclusion lens. Of course, I think that we're all aware that sometimes we have a very stoic way of, this is the way a job announcement is supposed to read, right? But when we talked about equity and inclusion and how we can make sure that we are looking at our policies, looking at our programs, initiatives, even our trainings through an equity and inclusion lens. So know that it's an ongoing effort that we are engaged in, but know it is something that we are working on when we look at those job descriptions to say, I understand when we talk about the bare minimums of what we're looking at, not always the preferreds and what I have to have, because we know that sometimes that will exclude individuals, right? So one of the things that we're also going to be working on is, we know that there are sometimes people who are looking at our recruitment process, those hiring supervisors, also being able to look at our recruitment process and identify those gaps through an equity and inclusion lens of where we can be better serving the people through equity and inclusion. So that's something that is ongoing that we continue to work on.
Okay, super. So then there's a couple questions in here around the same themes of the legislature and working with the legislature. The first one is, and I think this could go to either Ms. Ivanko or Ms. Krim. So what is the administration doing to respond to legislative efforts to ban words like diversity, equity, inclusion? And then sort of, I agree, a related question is how do you describe the power influence your council has considering the predominantly white and male legislature? So those are two questions. I don't know who wants to tackle that.
So I'll start. When I think about the council, we live in the state of Wisconsin, so when you look at our demographics bear out what our legislature looks like. But you have to start by bringing voices to the table. You got to have representation. And so my background is education, so this is really about educating. A lot of times there's perception around what can be done and what should be done. But unless you have the voices at the table providing insight and input with what's happening and sharing their expertise and helping to evaluate policy and move ideas forward, you'll never get there. And so what I appreciate about the governor putting together this council of diverse voices is his effort to say, this is something that is important to me as well as the state. And so I need to hear from those who have something to share that can help this state. And so I think there's always going to be questions. And so you have to be very intentional about the work that you set forward. And that's what the governor has done with this council.
And if I can contribute something here, it is, I think, frustrating. There were several initiatives that the governor included in this budget, elevating a chief equity officer to be a cabinet level position so that everyone understands and that there is an ability to have a network across the enterprise around these, having equity officers in each of the departments. And those were things that were cast aside by the legislature. I think there's a belief and an understanding that not only does Wisconsin's richness and state government in the demographic challenges we have and the overall challenges that we have, we're enriched by being able to elevate these things, but it's inevitable. These are things that are coming. Either we're going to be on the front end of it or we're going to trail. I think, and Malika can talk about this, a number of the initiatives that we had in the budget were things that were best practices that we found from other states, or that, we have a network around the country that she works with that we're able to find some and mine some of those good ideas and put them into practice in the way that fits and suits Wisconsin. And so we continue to do those things. And I think one of the things that we have opportunities to do are things outside of the legislative process. The work that Dawn is doing is part of that. The work that we've been able to do with the America Rescue Plan Act dollars. And these are opportunities that, the governor has significant discretion. We get input from stakeholders, we get input from legislators and others on the use and the application of the ARPA dollars, as we did with the CARES dollars before. But we can do that in a very efficient way and direct those dollars, and that can have an impact moving forward. And so, we may be at some point, and at some of the efforts that we've tried to do that I think that the governor believes and we as an administration believe are right for Wisconsin and are where we're going. They've been slowed down by the legislature in some ways, but none of that has been stopped, and the momentum for these things is moving forward and will continue to do. I don't know, maybe you want to just add a little bit.
Yeah, I do want to add that when we talk about the membership of the council, it's also, I remember when we were having conversation with the Gov's office that it was important. He said, I don't want people rubber stamping the initiatives that we're trying to work on and getting feedback, right? It was important that this was a council, of leaders that were willing to come to the table and do the work. He also made a promise to us that he was going to be there, and he has attended every single one of our council meetings, and he has been very supportive, very open when the council has questions, when the council has ideals. He has been willing and very open to listen to those suggestions. I think, Joel, I feel like it was kind of a scar that was rubbed because we put a lot of time and energy into, I remember the charge was when we talk about best practices and benchmarking against industry, we did that, and it was be creative. What can we do to move the needle as it relates to equity and inclusion for the state? Come up with some great ideals, and we did that. Our team spent an immense amount of time trying to come up with, just really great initiatives that would help us move the needle. And as Joel mentioned, some of those things got struck, and were not approved by the legislature. One of the things that we wanted to make sure when we talk about recognition, Dawn had talked about the flag that was raised. We wanted to make Juneteenth a holiday, right? We also wanted to focus on, Veterans Day as a holiday. We talked about the paid parental leave for our employees, which again is something that a lot of other states are doing that we're just not able to move forward with right now. We talked about having a governor's fellow program. So and those are just some examples of things that we put in there. I don't believe that just because things that were not approved, we will keep coming back to the table, and we will keep working on the things that we can work on and that we have the power to continue working on. So while they may not have been approved, it will not stop us from still moving this work forward.
Okay, wonderful. So there's a couple questions in the chat that I'm not sure we have time for around representation on the council, but I know in both of your conversations you talked about the intentionality about what that really means to be a diverse led council. So I think okay, and then there's a couple more questions specific about very specific initiatives. So one question was the sentencing project reported that 1 in 36 Black persons in Wisconsin are incarcerated, leading the nation in this number. Is this something that you've been able to address with the governor as part of your agenda?
And so I'll jump in. As you talk about the intentionality of the council, there's representation across all walks of life. I also failed to mention, I wanted to talk about the pride flag going up as well. Because again, this is a governor that realizes people want to bring their whole selves to work and live out loud. And that's what we're trying to do as a state. There were 6 bullet points on that slide regarding the charge of the council. And so the council is trying to focus specifically and really hone in on those charges. But as you talk about the incarceration rates and numbers of that standpoint, this is a governor that has pardoned more people in the state of Wisconsin than any other governor. He also has been focused on the criminal justice system and reform. And if people have a chance to look at some of his policies and stances, you'll see that what is currently in place is unacceptable and is something that he is working to address through the work as the governor. But Joel, you may have something.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to offer. I was going to certainly mention on the pardons. I think the governor would probably say that that's some of the most gratifying work that he has done, but that's at the other end of the spectrum. I mean, I think the investments that we're making around innovation in workforce, the way that we're trying to continue to improve the K-12 education system. The governor from day one, and people who know this governor have probably heard him say it, that his job and our job in working in his administration is about connecting the dots. And so you can't talk about things in silos. And so all of the interrelated and interconnected aspects of these things, come down to making sure that we provide a respectful workplace for people, that we provide opportunity for people who want to be able to be productive members of society. And so everything that we're doing are kind of the building blocks around that. But it's, I think Dawn said it well, and I think everyone would agree that the current system is not one that anyone finds acceptable who spends a lot of time in it. This is a UW event, and we've been competing whether we're spending more money on corrections or the UW system. And I think these three panelists and probably everybody who's watching this would agree that the investments that we can make in the long-term future of the state are better suited towards the higher education than it is towards corrections. And we have moved that needle in some ways. We've got a very long way to go to ensure that we do that for the future.
Okay, thanks so much for that. a couple very other kind of initiative specific questions that have come up is, one, what are the plans for connecting with communities that are unvaccinated? So how has this rollout, I mean, I know the DEI initiatives happened before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, and pandemic has just highlighted the important need for all of this work. So what's happening with respect to unvaccinated populations?
Well, I mean, there's significant work that has happened. A lot of that work is done with local public health. I think if there's something that's been tested over the last 18 months, and I think some of the stresses that have been shown is the connection between state and local government, the connection between statewide public health aspects and what happens at the local level. I think there's been a lot of co-investment that has happened. Well, you know, we've mentioned a lot around the CARES dollars and the ARPA dollars. With the CARES money, about 50% of those dollars statewide went to the public health response to COVID-19. With the ARPA dollars, it's about 20% that's been set aside. It shows you some of the progress we've made, but also we still have those challenges, and we haven't been able to get over all of the hurdles in having people do what is the right thing to do and the best way to get out of COVID-19, which is to make sure everybody is vaccinated. Now, there's another opportunity that will happen just days from now as a new crop, as you know, kids 5 to 11 have the opportunity, and you know, and the governor and everyone around us and in our own communities and our own families, we have a responsibility and obligation, opportunity to do that right thing again. So you'll just continue to see us pushing forward on that, but we're doing it. And I think one of the great things about Wisconsin is we're doing it in partnership with the responsible businesses around the state, with higher education, you know, with a lot of those partners, the K-12 school system. All of those partners have come to the table, and it hasn't been perfect, but we've all been aligned on what the mission is, and I think have made great progress. There's still some work to be done, though.
Yeah, and I heard Ms. Ivanka talk about data-driven decision-making, so thinking about the pockets of unvaccinated and how DEI initiatives might be contributing, how the data have supported the allocation of those funds to really support local health departments, particularly those who are struggling more or less with the vaccination initiatives and efforts.
Do you want to address any of that? I mean, it's certainly...
I could jump in. I would say I'll give one clear example that the Department of Health Services has done to think about a more equitable approach. Early on in the pandemic, they talked about bringing arms to shots or whatever. What they've done, though, is they have allowed any provider that wanted to assist with vaccinations to do it where the people are. So Secretary Brennan and I had an opportunity to visit G's Cuts in Milwaukee, a barbershop that also worked in partnership with a pharmacist to actually administer shots in the barbershop. So when you're in for a haircut, you also could get vaccinated. And there are countless examples like that around the state where whoever wanted to participate, they were set up to participate in partnership with pharmacists to administer shots where people are. Excellent, thank you. So the last question is a big picture question, and again, might be difficult for this particular panel, but you know, I think everyone's somewhat worried about gerrymandering and voting rights and making sure that there's an equitable voice around voting rights in the state. So can you talk a little bit about, is there a plan within the work you're doing to address this particular issue?
Well, I mean, I think all of us, if you read the morning paper today or you saw what happened in the last 24 hours, it was the culmination of a year's worth of work by the People's Maps Commission. They submitted their plans to the governor, and there are a reflection of what are really, you know, from an equity standpoint, one of the great efforts that's gone on in the state of Wisconsin around making sure that we can have nonpartisan maps. It was, you know, a representation from across all the congressional districts, hearings where hundreds of people got to provide their input, working with technical experts nationally, and they provided maps, and a nonpartisan reviewer looked at the People's Maps Commission maps versus what the legislature has outlined. You know, one got an A and one got an F. You know, the people are the ones who got the A, the legislature got the F. And so, you know, I think that's the biggest way that we can contribute and what the governor can contribute, because it it's not going to be the people around this table or just the people from the administration. It truly is the people around the state who have contributed to this, and that's where our strength comes from. That's what we've been talking about over the last hour when it comes to our workforce, the work we're doing statewide. So the thing that I can encourage people who care about gerrymandering, care about fair elections is make sure you're invested and engaged in the discussions that are happening, because there is action that will be taken in the legislature in the next several weeks. There'll be action in the courts in the coming months, and make sure that people are aware that decisions that are made statewide and what you can do statewide is really limited by the fact that, you know, politicians choosing the people who elect them as opposed to the people being able to choose those who represent them. Sorry if I got a little passionate there. I think we're all passionate about that.
It's great. No, it's great. It's great. And I want to be conscious of the time. I just want to say thank you to all of you for your commitment and your contributions to the state and the very, very important work that you're doing. As a former state employee, it's really wonderful to hear all of the work that's ongoing and sort of really the movement forward in the needle. You guys, we have to start somewhere, and all of your initiatives are so well thought out, put together, and I really think the long-term impacts will be incredibly powerful in the state of Wisconsin. So thanks for your work. And I think we're done. Thank you.
Thank you very much for monitoring the questions and working with us from that standpoint.
More than happy to do it. Take care, everybody.